Ascension friends, welcome to today's broadcast. I'm your host, Raji from houseofraji.com, and we got another cool and interesting interview for you today. So many of you here are familiar with Hermes and the 7 Hermetic principles. But if you're totally unfamiliar, we have a great presentation on our YouTube channel by Billy Carson, who dives deep with them in a 2-hour presentation. Definitely check it out. Grab a notepad and a pen. You will take notes. But on today's interview, we're going to be looking closely at one of the Hermetic principles, and that is as above, so below, as below, so above. And I'm sure you've heard that saying at some point in your life. Well, with my guest today, Kathleen Covalt, we will be discussing this principle, laws of creation, and the interconnectedness of life. Kathleen Covalt has a doctoral degree in educational psychology with a specialization in transpersonal psychology and a master's degree in psychological counseling. Over the years, Kathleen has studied philosophy, psychology, counseling, education, intuition development, energy healing, cultural diverse spiritual paths, and the UFO UAP phenomenon. She knows a lot. Together with her husband, for 13 years, they've raised sheep and chickens who taught her about the incredible intelligence of nature's creatures, and that at the deepest level, we are all truly one consciousness. Kathleen, welcome. Thank you so much for being here today. Wow, I'm super excited to have our conversation.
Oh, Raji, yeah, I'm really happy to be here. This is such a great topic to talk about.
Amazing. So let's start with a little bit about you. When did you start learning about the Hermetic principles and then applying them to your life?
Well, I can say that as you gave my intro, after I was in my master's degree program, I was going at the University of Notre Dame for counseling. And I realized that I was intuitive, that I was psychic. And that was not in my background. I didn't know anybody who was. It was something foreign to me. But I had always been empathic. I was always a very feeling oriented person. I could feel other people's emotions very deeply. But when I had clients for the very first time and they were sitting in front of me and they were struggling, all of a sudden I knew things about their past that I didn't know how I knew. And so I could help them get to what happened when they were 7 or 12 that is currently impacting them now in whatever situation they were struggling with. And if we went back to that and we kind of unpacked that and we understood that, and maybe we took a different perspective now as an adult on what happened and the other people involved, that would be a beginning of a healing for them. And it was very powerful. But I didn't feel like I could go along the traditional counseling route because I wanted to tell them, yeah, didn't something happen when about this age? And that's not really what regular counselors do.
Right.
And so what I did then is I graduated and I started to explore anything I could find from a more academic and scientific perspective about intuitive abilities. And there wasn't a lot. This was in the 1980s, Raji. So, a long, long time ago now. Yeah. But what I did do, and this is so perfect for me to honor this person right now, I went to a lecture in around 1985. It was given by a gentleman called Robert, Brenda Dunn and Robert John, Jahn, Robert John. And he was the founder with a woman, Brenda Dunn, of what was called the PAIR Lab, or the Princeton Engineering Anomalies Lab, Research Lab at Princeton University in their engineering department. And so I was so happy to hear him talk because he was talking about the research they were doing at Princeton on the ability of the mind to affect random number generators. And also they had this contraption they called Murphy. And it was really cool. It was like 300 or so pegs. And they would drop these ping pong ball kind of things. And they would go bing, 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 bing. And if you did it just right, and it was made so that it would fall like it was supposed to, just straight, down without any, wind or anything like that. What would happen is, it would bing over here, and the end result would be what was called a normal curve. Okay. There would be most in the middle, but some of the balls would fall over here. Some of the balls would be over here. And they had people make it so that the curve shifted one way or the other, so that more balls fell to the right or fell to the left, depending on their intention.
So let me just I want to make sure I'm understanding this correctly. So in order to set up this experiment, let's call it, they first got a baseline to see what the natural curvature would be. Then they got a group of people to concentrate and meditate, or have an intention that the balls go right
or left
Yep. And
exactly.
And then what did they
find?
It happened.
Yeah. And they're doing this at Princeton. This is why I love this. And then the other thing that they did was they had what's called random number generators. So a random number generator would have like a 1 or 0. And so let's say 1 meant high and 0 meant low. And they would randomly, you would come out with kind of, equal. Like sometimes it'd be high, sometimes it would be low, but it would go basically like this over time. They had people intended to go higher or lower. That is more ones, let's say, or more zeros, just to be very simple about it. And it happened again. People could make a random number generator that's supposed to be completely random, have more ones or more zeros, depending on their intention. In other words, in our community, let's say, people understand the term psychokinesis, or mind having ability on matter. And that's what these guys did for like 28 years or something like that. They had in a library, in the laboratory, people using their mind to affect matter. And so this was a big deal for me at that time, because I wanted to know that what I was experiencing was real, but I loved science, I loved academic stuff. And so to have Robert John give this presentation, I was blown away. And so I just want to say that he had died a couple years ago, but Brenda Dunn, who was the co-founder and led these experiments as well, she just passed just a couple weeks ago. So I wanted to send my blessings out to her. She was one of my heroes, when I was going through all this and becoming comfortable with my own abilities.
Nice. Wow. Thank you so much for sharing that. Wow. So now that makes me wonder, what is the connection between intuition and intention?
Well, what is the main thing that we're talking about today, and the reason I think the study of Hermes and these Hermetic principles are so important is because we talk about the portal to ascension. What does that mean? What is humanity going through as we're continuing our evolving into higher level beings? But at this time in particular, it's like all of humanity has this ability right now. There's a certain energy here that we are a part of that is allowing even more people in a faster rate to potentially ascend, to develop their abilities, to get a higher vibe and create a new world, a new reality. And one of the key things that we as a culture have to look at, and that science has to start to explore, is the nature of consciousness. And this is the key. And one of the things about the Hermetic principles that have been brought up since, I think, Hermes was Atlantean. Some people disagree. Some people put Hermes at the time of Abraham, like that might be like 2,900, 2,700 years BC. But I like to think of Hermes as bringing this information from Atlantis. It was taught teacher to student, teacher to student. And then some things were written down, but as you said, other speakers have said, a lot of the Hermetic writings were destroyed in the Great Fire at the Library of Alexandria. So we have still some of the things, but one of the key points with the Hermetic philosophy is that it's the mind of God, that everything is mental, that the universe is mind. And if we change that word, mind or mental, and we do a more today word, we could say everything is consciousness. And that's where I think this culture has to embrace these concepts. And what consciousness implies is that everything has an intelligence. Everything doesn't just have English, in a brain like humans, but it has an intelligence that is filtered through the physical nature of whatever the being or thing is. So everything is alive with intelligence and a consciousness that we can communicate with. So what is intuition? Intuition is me recognizing the outgrowth of the Hermetic principle that we are all not just part of God, we are God. There is nothing else to be but God. Okay, God is everything, everywhere. There is nothing else but God. So we are all connected, all one, because essentially we are all one of that great consciousness or that aspect of God. So when I become intuitive and it's like I put my focus, I shift my state of consciousness just a little, and I am then joined with you. I am then joined with it like in my, even though I already am, but I shift my focus to that. And then as I shift that, I can access information because it's as easy as me thinking, how does my left foot feel? How are you doing? You and I are part of the one great body of God. And so I get my information that way. That's how I think about it. And so I'll stop there. And then in a little while, we can maybe talk a little bit better about intention as well.
Right. Okay. Wow. Okay. So I want to go to in a couple of different directions, but let's stay with the intentionality of it. So it sounds like you're saying consciousness is a scale, and let's call it a spectrum, and you can shift your consciousness to align with the over intelligence, let's call it, because essentially the universe, or if we are in the mind of God, we also have the same intelligence capacity and mechanism. It's not exactly the same. And so we can become aligned with that, which you're saying is intuition. Is that correct?
I love that. That's a great way to say it.
Yeah. Well, you know what? That's the first Hermetic principle, and it's actually one of my favorites. If I can say I have a favorite one, it's the principle of mentalism, and all is mind, and the universe is mental. Because I like the idea of it's intelligence interacting with intelligence.
That's right.
And yeah, I like that a lot. Wait, do you have a favorite principle?
I think it's that too.
Okay.
I really do. Because it's when we understand that everything is consciousness, we can then use that. And the other principle I like, Raji, is the principle of correspondence, which is the next one. And may I just describe that to the audience a little bit?
Absolutely.
Okay. The idea of the principle of correspondence is the as above, so below, and then as below, so above, and as above, so below. It goes both ways. And the reason it goes both ways is because it's all one. It's all the same. And how they describe it is, within the Hermetic teachings, they describe the universe as three great planes, three great layers, let's say, of existence. You have a physical layer, you have a mental layer, and you have a spiritual layer, but they're all made up of the same thing, mind or consciousness. But the level of vibration is what distinguishes them. So another Hermetic principle is everything vibrates, everything moves. So these levels there's not a sharp distinction between the levels. They kind of meld into one another. It's more like use the word spectrum, which I love. It's more of a spectrum. It's like, I love this analogy, clouds. If you ever go out on a kind of day where you look up into the sky and you see at one level, very high up, these wispy, they're kind of called cirrus clouds, and they're moving in this direction. But lower, there's these fluffy clouds, and they might be moving in an entirely different direction, cumulus clouds. And so if you think of the layers of our atmosphere, different types of clouds with different shapes live at the different levels. And they might have wind patterns different at the different levels. Like if you're a pilot, you have to know that what the wind is at a certain level. It's not all the same. That is how the great planes of existence work. You've got these layers, it's all connected, but there's different, let's say, abilities, different manifestations at the different levels. Different types of beings even live at the different levels.
Wow. Okay. So interesting. I like how you're framing this right now. So there's three planes of existence. We got the physical, the mental, and the spiritual. Each plane vibrates at a certain frequency, and I guess they would have their own resonations in each, but they sort of blend. And so this is when you shift, perhaps you can shift, when you're shifting your consciousness, you can shift from the physical all the way to the spiritual down to mental, because thoughts are things, and thoughts also carry energy signature, just like emotions carry energy signatures as well. So now going back to as above, so below, as above, it's a feedback loop in a way.
Yes, because like you're saying, you get a resonance, like it's all part of one thing. And so what's happening lower is also happening higher. So it helps you understand things. So if you want to understand, you can understand something at one level, and then you can say, oh, I wonder if that is a good analogy for what's working this over here. And yes, it usually is, because it's all part of one, and yet it sort of manifests differently. But when you understand one thing at one level, it helps you understand another thing at another level, because it's the same thing, and it uses the same principles, let's say.
And when we say it's the same thing, we're talking about consciousness. And I think
That's
it's
right.
important. We have to keep bringing it back to, we're talking about consciousness.
Yes.
Consciousness is everything.
Yes.
And so would you say energy is consciousness too then? Or is that synonymous?
Well, here's the thing. I have thought about that question a lot, because in the Hermetic principles, like we're saying, the first one is everything's mental, okay? So let's say everything's consciousness or mental. But then there's the principle of everything vibrates. So if everything's mental and everything vibrates, then consciousness must vibrate. And so we're saying, like you just said, thought vibrates, emotion vibrates, but all of consciousness must vibrate. It just kind of follows to me.
Yes. So now consciousness is vibrating, and we have different resonances and three pretty solid perspectives. We've got the physical, mental, and spiritual perspectives, let's call them. So now the next principle is the principle of polarity. Everything
Yes.
is dual. So okay, if consciousness is all one, why did it split? Or because I know it's all one. So shed some light on duality.
Okay. Duality means this, that hot is the opposite pole of cold. And so,
but it's all temperature.
but it's all temperature. That's right. And so it's a Hermetic teaching that if you want to change fear, focus on courage. In other words, focus on the opposite end of the polarity to shift your state of being or your mental state. So because that's how you transmute things. You work from, if you're at one pole, you want to shift it to the opposite pole. And because you can't go from like cold to red, let's say. They're not the different poles. So if you want something in your life, you focus not on making it work, changing or fixing a habit. No, you focus on what you do want. You put your attention on what you do want, the energy that you do want. That's part of the transmutation, is it goes that way.
Okay. So is that where freedom lies though? Are you free though if you are just bouncing back and forth, or is there some middle? Is the goal here to do the opposite, or to blend or merge? No, maybe.
Yes, I see what you mean. Like you want to stay like balanced, like that's like,
yeah,
that's
instead of that.
Instead of binging banging. Well, some Eastern philosophies say that that's the goal, is not to get attached to things so that your emotional state gets out of whack.
Exactly.
Okay. Yep. That's where freedom and choice is in choosing your state of consciousness. We don't have free will totally. And I know that makes some people upset, but I don't think we do, because we are part of global energies, cosmic energies, universal energies. And they sort of set the stage for the drama of human existence. And so we don't have total free will, and then we get born with certain physical aspects that our physical body has, which, by the way, we are not our bodies, of course. That is our vehicle, our clothes for this lifetime. We are, our individualized soul is more of how we can identify. But anyway, maybe we can talk about that later and the importance of that. But we have the freedom to choose what state of mind we are in with any circumstance. How we are going, if we're going to be in a centered state, instead of reacting to things, to be center so that we can see clearly. If we react, what usually happens is this: we're in a situation and a person or an event happens and it makes us afraid or it makes us angry. And I believe we literally shift our focus to that. And I believe that's a field. Remember, everything vibrates, but everything has its sort of own vibration, so that when you become afraid, you shift into a field of fear that you have created over your whole lifetime of feeling that and all the other events. And so you can't see clearly because it's literally you are looking out through everything seems fearful when you're in that state, or when you're, when you're in any state at all, you're clouded by that. So your freedom, your choice says, wait a minute, I recognize that I'm feeling this. It's not my centered state. So I'm going to shift back to my center. And now I have more options in order to act. I can choose how to respond and not just react from a field of energy that you can only be that.
Yes.
Am I being clear with that? Yeah.
100%. I feel like you're describing the importance of meditation and having grounded spiritual practice and self-development in a way. Most of the time, we're reacting all the time without taking even a moment to respond. And there is a difference between reacting and responding. Responding, there is a pause, there is a reflection. Whereas with the reaction, it's automatic. And so when you were talking about the fear, I'm going to say it's a pattern, and we get our minds and our brains love patterns, right? And they're safe. And so the moment something, and like to do the opposite of something, going back to the polarity principle, it feels uncomfortable. But if you do it more and more and often enough, you can sort of train yourself, right? And I just want to read what the Kabbalion says about it. It says, everything is dual, everything has poles, everything has its pair of opposites. Like and unlike are the same. Opposites are identical in nature, but different in degree. Extremes meet. All truths are but half-truths. All paradoxes may be reconciled.
Yes.
And they can be reconciled by recognizing its opposite.
Yep. And I love what you said. One of the key things is, how do you know when you're in your center? What does that feel like? And so the practice of meditation is helping you know what that feels like.
Exactly. So you can keep remembering that.
Yes.
And so then so now we recognized, okay, I'm here. And if I recognize its opposite, and I can come back to my center and then make a choice of which, and there lies the freedom to choose, and we can go from there. So now how does this connect to the next one, which is the principle of rhythm?
Everything swings from pole to pole.
Okay.
And so, but not always to the extreme of the pole, but there's always a movement like this. And so one of the things that we're saying with the power of meditation and coming back to our center is that if you recognize that you're in a swing, let's say to a depression, let's say that has been a past thing for you, and you're swinging back, because you might go like this, because everything kind of goes like this, or you might think like a wave, everything goes like this, right? And so if you come back to your center and you align more with not the physical, but maybe the mental or the spiritual, you sort of rise above it and can look down at it, and you're not affected by it as much. You are above it. You can see maybe that it's happening in your life, but you're not as impacted by it because you're seeing the motion of it, but you yourself and how you feel and your consciousness, you're more an observer. And so you can rise above some things in your life like that easier and not get so pulled down into it.
Yes. And again, going back to the freedom, there's freedom there.
Yes.
You're not getting, sucked in and pulled into these energy vortexes, I would call them sometimes.
It's difficult because life, like you're saying, it's been a pattern. And so let's say when you're angry, you want to yell, you want to do something, but you have to say, you have to have a greater a greater motivation. And mine is that, let's say, I love my husband and I don't want to do that to him anymore. And I also want to be the highest spiritual being I can be. And that's greatly motivating to me. And so you have to become aware when you're in your pattern that you're in it. And then you have to say, what can I do to come back to my center? And usually it's like, I can't talk about it now. Don't talk to me now. I need a little break because I need to regroup and recenter. And then you can have a real dialogue and process what's been going on. And
sorry.
I want to talk about too, like anger. A lot of people get into anger, and there's might be a lot of anger these days. There's benefit in those emotions. I'm not saying that those emotions are bad. There's benefit. Anger usually tells you there's something that needs to be changed. Yep. You know, it's a motivator. It's like saying, I'm not going to do this anymore. But you don't want to act with the anger. Then you're putting more of that vibe out into the world. You say when you're in that angry state, yep, I'm going to do something about this. But you come back to your center. And you figure out with that centered, more loving, compassionate energy, how you're going to make change in the world. And you're not putting more of the anger energy into the world, but you use it as a motivator to let you know, yes, change has to happen.
Beautiful. Thank you for that. What's your favorite way, what is your favorite way to trigger awareness in yourself?
I feel like I have lived my life very reflective of myself. I feel like I didn't have an easy childhood. It was very chaotic. And I went to a lot of schools. I love education, but the great thing is I got free counseling. So every school I went to, and I've been to a lot, I always took advantage of that. So I've done a lot of and you know, even at my doctoral program, I've done a lot of self-reflection. And so it's pretty easy for me to be self-aware because I studied psychology. That was my interest. You know, I find these things very interesting. So for someone else, though, who's not so self-aware, I really think that everybody has a different way to center. Some people are going to really be very meditative, like you and I. I think, Raji, let me ask you this. I think you're going to be like me like this. Even though I like to be out in public and I like to teach and meet new people, my essence is very introverted. I am very quiet, and I really need a lot of downtime to be by myself, and that's how I center, you know. There's other people that need a group in order to feel okay. There's people who need to use their bodies to go for a run, to go for a walk, you know, that's how they come back to their center. And so when they are doing, some people use music, some people use the spoken word to be able to get into that kind of creative process. And the creative process is a great link to something higher. And as that comes through you, you kind of feel a centeredness, you know? Yes. So the thing is to just ask yourself, how am I feeling right now? Is this my centered state? How do I feel? And it's really a matter of those reflective questions, you know, when you think you're centered or when you don't.
Yeah. Wow. Can I share something with you?
Sure.
It's so relevant. So today I completely felt off my center, and I'm going through a little bit of a transition right now, moving locations and various other things, and I was super off my center, and I realized after having a conversation with a loved one that I was projecting a little bit, or I was reacting actually. And so I stopped and I actually thought to myself exactly what you said. what would help me feel grounded and centered again? And for me, it was journaling. And so I journaled out my feelings, and more truth came out from the writing. And it turned into a little bit of a poem towards the end as a creative outlet. And I learned that sometimes when I feel these ways, it's exactly to get me back into my center. So what I thought was terrible, and I had a list of emotions that I was feeling, everything from insecurity, fear, jealousy, resentment, like really dense, shame, guilt, like really dense. But by the end of the session of writing, which took 3 pages, I was smiling, and I had come back to a baseline. And for me, my baseline is pretty peaceful, and it's like yourself, a lot of work has gone into that. A lot of self-reflection. So I'm super glad that you mentioned all of that for people. And so with your work, and when you're working one-on-one with individuals, do you like to do some of these practices with them, and guide and teach?
Yeah, it's mainly like I like to help people figure out what works for them, what type of personality they are. I love the work from my psychology background. It's called the theory of multiple intelligences. And it was devised by the Harvard psychologist Howard Gardner. And he says that we don't just have one intelligence, you're smart or you're not. We have 8 different types. And I really love that theory, and I've used it in so many ways. And that's what I when I meet with somebody and I'm trying to help them figure out how they can find their inner peace, come back to their center. I go through, like for instance, the writing. I love that you did that, and and by the way, the fact that you like to interview and talk, you're using verbal. You're using that same
True.
energy. Let's
Yeah.
say.
Thank
Mhm.
you. Thank you for, yeah, for, I didn't actually put that together. So thank you for
Mhm.
that. I
Mhm.
appreciate that.
Mhm.
And so I wonder how this comes back to cause and effect, which is the next principle. And it says every cause has its effect. Every effect has its cause. Everything happens according to law. Chance is but a name for law not recognized. There are many planes of causation, but nothing escapes the law.
That's right. And so sometimes we do not know what is the cause of something. It's just much bigger or perhaps much older. I mean, some people say that they carry into this, if we talk about reincarnation, even. I think cause can be well away from your current situation.
Mm.
And the other thing that's really interesting that current science talks about is like retro causation. Like,
Mhm.
what's time? And can time move backwards as well as forwards? And I think, yes, I think there really is. So I have done this for myself, and I don't know if this would be interesting to some people. To people who think that, like, me or like us, maybe you had a hard childhood, send some loving prayers to yourself when you were younger.
Yes.
And sometimes I think that can really, I don't know, there's something really beautiful about that, like thinking of yourself as young and sending encouragement and love. And I do think there's something that can happen like that. But yeah, so the law of cause and effect is important in that realize that everything you say goes out into the world, but somehow will come back to you. Everything you feel will go out into the world, but somehow will come back to you. But maybe not. I don't know if it's always in this lifetime or that we see it like that.
Yep.
Um, the other thing that's really interesting, and I tie in here, and I haven't quite figured this out, is the wonder of synchronicity. Like,
Mm.
I have synchronicities all the time. And I
Yep.
think it's when you're aligned with your soul
Yep.
that happens more.
Mm.
There's something about that. So I think again, cause and effect is happening on different planes.
Yes.
Maybe it's happening on the soul plane as well. And it's because we're all connected.
Yeah, it's totally like I think you said it perfectly there. Kathleen, do you subscribe to a holographic view of the universe?
I know that was put out some time ago. That what I like about a holographic view of the universe, I think means that every little part contains every other thing. And I like that because that kind of fits like the as above, so below kind of thing, where everything is God, every piece of you is God. So everything contains everything. I kind of like it.
Is that a scary thought for somebody? Is that a terrifying thought?
Oh, how do you mean?
Like the grandness of it could be overwhelming for some. But it's nice to I think it's also a nice thought to feel and know that the smallest thing is just like the biggest thing, and the biggest thing is like the smallest thing. We see that all the time in nature, right?
Yes,
Like the spiraling of the galaxies
I
with the
love
shell
that.
and
That's
people
also
bodies. Yeah.
that's also a good example of the pattern of correspondence. Like what happens, like a neural network is similar to the neural sort of pattern of, not neural, but the pattern of the galaxies,
Yes.
yeah, the same patterns. Yeah, I was going to say
So
something.
then,
Yeah.
so speaking of the patterns, then the last law talks about gender, and the terms masculine and feminine get thrown around a lot. And so let's just see what it says. It's the principle of gender. Gender is in everything. Everything has its masculine and feminine principles. Gender manifests on all planes. Is this alluding and speaking to the dual nature of consciousness?
Okay. I'm writing down something down because I want to say it later.
Yeah, okay, okay.
Because I forgot. I remembered what I want to say. It's cool. But anyway, gender. I think, I do not know, but this is how I think of it. It kind of goes along with the principle of polarity and the principle of, everything's vibrating and everything is in rhythm. The Hermetists teach that when the great consciousness of God created this universe, there was what was called an involution, or a slowing down of vibration. It was an out breath. Okay. It was that God consciousness sent out this energy that slowed down, and it was unindividuated. It didn't have any individual parts. It was this mass of energy, and it was this breathing out. But then what happens, remember, it's the rhythm. It got to the pole end, and now what happens is evolution. There's involution, God getting lower and lower, and that energy getting into the deepest, darkest part of matter.
Yep.
And then comes evolution, where we're going back to our highest aspect of God.
Yep.
And as we go up the in-breath, okay, the great thing is we are individualized now. We are becoming more and more an individual. We are knowing ourselves for who we are. We are the same yet different than everybody else. And what I find so comforting to me, because when you say, does it scare you? The thing that used to scare me is that, yeah, I want to raise my vibration and go back to God, but I don't want to be nothing,
Yeah.
I don't want to just go into some big blob
To the void.
and not be anymore. That's what scared me. But the Hermetists teach something very comforting. They say, as you go back, you become more and more individuated, more and more yourself, special. And when you go back into God, you are still retain your individuality. I find that very comforting.
I like that one too. I've been going deep with the merging of matter and spirit, and it's like we are the alchemists, and
Love
we're
alchemy.
we're becoming something completely new.
Yes.
And that's awesome because change is happening all day, every day, every moment, every second. So better to embrace the changing nature of reality,
Mhm.
and the cosmos, instead of resisting or fighting against it too. So,
Yes.
wow,
And
wow, wow,
may
wow.
I share this other thing that I
Yes,
think is
please.
comforting, just
Yep.
because you brought up the fear thing? The other thing that the alchemists say, that and the hermeticists, because the alchemists based a lot of their stuff on the hermetic stuff,
Yep.
and that is actually, I love it, it's also found in the Gospel of Thomas. It is this, that God is both, or consciousness, you can say, is both personal and impersonal. So we've been talking about God as the impersonal, everything. There's nothing else but God, okay? But Hermes also teaches Tat, his son, and I have a hard time pronouncing his student's name, Asclepius. I
Mm-hmm.
know I'm killing that one, but something like that, his student, that he says, pray to the Lord, pray to the Father, and talk, you can talk to the Father.
Mm-hmm.
And that is very similar to, in the Gospel of Thomas, there's a verse that's something like, split the piece of wood and I am there.
Mm.
Lift the stone and there you will find me. That's, that's God is everywhere. But then we also have pray to God your Father, or I grew up Catholic, our Father who
Mm.
art in heaven. So to me, it's comforting to know that this consciousness, this great consciousness, knows who we are
Mm.
and responds to us in our moments of prayer and asking out, that
Mm.
there is help available. And we didn't even talk about all the great beings that I believe that live in these different realms that also respond and help humanity. But you can just call out to this great consciousness and it does respond in a personal way. I find that very comforting too.
Me too. I like that. And a lot of religion has, middle people. But the great thing about spirituality is you can have a direct relationship and a, one-way or two-way conversation, with all that is. And that, for me, like you said, is super comforting, and I love knowing that.
Mhm.
So now we're gonna have to do something that I've never actually done before, and that is we're gonna have to wrap this interview right now. I'm having a major technical issue on my end,
Okay.
and I don't want this interview to just cut out abruptly because that's not fun. But
Okay.
I would love to invite you to a part two of this interview, because then we can talk about prayer, affirmative prayer, and how to connect even deeper with consciousness and see. And I want to hear about how you've used the Hermetic principles in your life and beyond.
Okay.
So, Kathleen, I want to thank you so much for being here today. And I would love for you to share with everyone, real quick, where they can find you.
Okay, I have a website and I always have my little piece of paper here that I read it because it's long. It's long. I'm sorry, everybody. It's pureenergylady.wixsite.com, and you have to put in /presentations. pureenergylady.wixsite.com/presentations.
Amazing. Thank you. And we will post the link, for everyone. I want to thank you for being here on Portal to Ascension, and thank you everyone for tuning in. Catch the replay, if you can, and look out for part two with myself and Kathleen. Thank you so much, Kathleen. Talk to you later.
Thank you, Vajay.